Hello everybody, welcome to the Whiskey Dictionary. There are so many celebrity-endorsed alcohols out there, just from wine, gin, whiskey, rum, vodka, like everything. And some of them are great, like Long Branch. Some of them are garbage, like others. But when I heard that Beyoncé, who I haven't listened to since she was in Destiny's Child, like way back when I was a teenage Bill, not my thing, right? But when I heard that Beyoncé was going to be putting out a whiskey, I just assumed it would be another income stream for a billionaire. And I assumed that, but I also assumed that she would have nothing to do with it, and I assumed it was going to be garbage. But then I got to try this whiskey, and I got to look a little bit more into the details, and my opinion changed. I'm going to assume that many of you are here for Beyoncé more so than for her whiskey, and that's totally fine. I don't want you to be lost in this section, so I'm going to define a couple of quick things, right? This has a really weird mash bill. Let's just start there. This is 51% rye, 49% malted barley. Now, what a mash bill means is essentially the recipe of the grains that go into a whiskey. It's as easy as that. Additionally, this is from MGP. Now, many of you will know what MGP is, but essentially it's a large distillery out of Indiana that can make whiskey to order. So if you tell them, hey, I want this particular mash bill, they can just make it. They have like everything, and they can make tons and tons of stuff. A lot of these smaller companies that you see, like if a random celebrity wants to make a whiskey, they don't have to have a distillery. They can essentially order it, and then if they want to fiddle with it afterwards, they certainly can. They can even tell MGP to fiddle with it. So all of this stuff is very common practice. It's not necessarily frowned upon, but it's not the same as like having your own distillery. Okay. So now that we understand all of that stuff, this is MGP, and it's one of their newest mash bills, which was introduced back in 2013, that 5149. But it's not a very common one, and there's only a couple of companies that I know that even use this, and that's Smokehouse and Barrel. I believe Barrel did it with their batch 2 of their rye, right? So all of that is strange for a random celebrity who is interested in having a whiskey to pick out. It just doesn't make any sense until you look a little bit more into it and you realize, this is going to blow your mind, you realize that Beyoncé is working with Dr. Bill Lumsden, who is the head of the distillery and whiskey creation at Ardbeg and Glenmorangie. Now, Ardbeg, a little less the last couple of years. They're still one of my favorite distilleries, but Glenmorangie is one of my favorite distilleries, and I love what Dr. Bill has been doing with the Tales series lately. So I was elated to see that not only was he on it, but that Beyoncé apparently has some good advice from somebody, or maybe she just knows the guy. Certainly possible. And she worked with somebody great. So this already has a lot going for it. A unique mash bill and a really good head distiller to help her to pick out something really nice. So awesome. Very excited about that. Next, they submitted this whiskey actually to a few whiskey competitions anonymously, and they actually submitted it with, it was called Davis Hogue. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. I'm going to just keep saying Hogue though. It's H-O-G-U-E. Davis Hogue Distillery Co. And that way nobody would really know it was Beyoncé's whiskey. Now maybe the word got around, but usually those competitions are pretty good. So it won a ton of awards, and people generally liked it. Awesome. Now, the least important kind of thing here is the story behind the whiskey, right? It's called SirDavis because Beyoncé's great-grandfather on her father's side was a moonshiner. And this is in the South. He would make moonshine, he owned a farm, and he would create whiskey, and then he would bottle it, and he would stick the bottles randomly in some of the cedar trees in the empty knots that they would have for people to find, namely like his friends or the people working on the farm. And that's like the best scavenger hunt ever. So it has a story behind it, even if it really has nothing to do with the whiskey. It's a story that can be at least backed up. And she says, she has this love of whiskey because, somebody like 100 years ago in her family used to make whiskey. That is what it is. Maybe her family does. I'm not here to criticize whatever she says that she believes, and that's totally fine. Okay, all of that is the story behind SirDavis. Let's talk about the actual whiskey. This was first released in September of 2024. This just came out. It is a no age statement whiskey, and let's talk about that for just a second. So this doesn't have to have an age statement on it, only because the minimum age in here is going to be over 4 years. And so they do not need to have an age on here. And I suspect that they didn't, only because either the age that it would be is not impressive, like 5 years or something, or possibly because this bottle is kind of awesome looking and it's very minimalistic, and maybe they didn't want to just throw a big number on there alongside the horse. Either way, they do not have to list the age, but just know that it's a no age statement. Its proof is 88 proof, so it's 44% ABV. It is, as I mentioned, 51% rye, 49% malted barley. It's aged in American bourbon barrels and then finished in Pedro Jimenez, which is a type of sherry barrels, so it's going to have a lot of fruity qualities to it as well. Now, they made an active choice to spell whiskey without an E. Typically in the United States, we do spell it with an E. There's a couple of exceptions, such as Maker's Mark, but the reason that they did that is because they knew it had a lot of malted barley in it, and that is very much a Scotch thing to do. And also, just with the finishing in the PX sherry casks, it makes sense. They kind of wanted to just more pay homage to Scotch. So maybe Bill had an opinion about that one. Now I'm going to give it its first ding. The price on this is way too high. $89 for a celebrity whiskey does not make any sense. Now, even if we consider all of the factors going into this bottle, this is a custom bottle for sure. That's going to take some time. It's going to take some money. It's going to take some tooling. So sure. But then you also have the celebrity name. You have the really impressive head distiller. You have rye and malted barley, which are both the more expensive grains. But all of that should not equate to $89. I think there's probably a huge chunk of this going to Beyonce or whoever else, and that really stinks. Because if you think of something like Wild Turkey's Long Branch, that is $40, and that has Matthew McConaughey, who is an A-list celebrity. You also have Jimmy Russell, who helped to make it, who is like easily as famous as Dr. Bill. And all of this for $40 versus $90. So that's something to consider. They do market themselves as a luxury whiskey, so that is potentially part of it. But in my opinion, still way too expensive. The nose on this is absolutely delightful. It is oranges like crazy. That's basically 85% of what you're smelling here. Most of the other things are going to be generalities, at least to start off with. For example, when I smell this, it's sweet, it's fruity. It has a very heavy kind of scent, which is coming from the malted barley, and maybe some like cinnamon or something like that. As you continue to nose this, the oranges will kind of move to the side though, because it's such a strong like smell of orange that it almost overpowers your senses and it gets ignored. It's like if you hear a really loud like white noise in the background, eventually your ears just forget it. It does the same thing when you nose or taste something. You overpower with a sense, then it will ignore that just to kind of protect itself, right? In this case, the orange is fading away, and now it's becoming more of a clove, ginger, cinnamon, maybe even a little chocolate from the malted barley there. One nice thing though, and I will say that this is kind of an opinion I've always held, any distillery that puts out a whiskey at over 40% is somebody that I believe is doing it on purpose. Because if the minimum that you need to do is 40%, which is the best way to do a cash grab, right? But if you go 43 or even 46, or in this case 44, I believe that that is truly what they thought it tasted the best at. And somebody like Dr. Bill, I kind of trust him to do right by the customers, especially if they're charging $90 for it. One thing that's interesting here is, although you are getting some clove, the rye is not as pronounced as it typically would be on another rye that you're getting, and a lot of that is because that single malt, the malted barley is, it's supporting kind of that fruity flavor, and it's just making the rye hide a little bit, at least to me. Let's go ahead and have a taste. Cheers. Okay, so the flavor here is a surprise, mostly because when you smell this and you get all of that orange and fruit and everything, you expect that to be on the taste, but it's not. In this case, the rye is overpowering any hint of finish that the sherry would give it. Even on the actual finish in your mouth, it's not really there. And that's okay. My expectation is that the sherry casks are either not brand new, or not first fill, or possibly they just didn't have a whole lot in them or a whole lot of flavor left in them. Either way, it did not overpower the rye. Now, rye is a very powerful flavor, so that's possible that that is why too. So let's go ahead and talk about what this does taste like rather than what it doesn't taste like. I think I need another sip. Cheers. Okay, so the most obvious here, and duh, it tastes like rye. So rye has a very specific flavor that I usually refer to just as rye spice. But the best way to think about it is, as you're drinking this, it's like a heat. It's not spicy like a jalapeno, but it is similar enough that if you're tasting this, you now know what I'm talking about. That is rye spice, and that is a very distinctive flavor. It's kind of like a too strong cinnamon, right? And to that end, there is also cinnamon in here as well. There's taste of toffee. There is kind of like the maltiness is definitely coming through, but it's not as savory as I was kind of expecting it to be. Now, I will say their website says that you should probably be tasting the oranges and cherries. I don't. Even on the finish, I'm not really getting that much fruit. You might, just something worth knowing. If you are tasting that, you're not out of your mind, but it is not something I taste. The flavor here is kind of, it's like a really good rye, right? And that's kind of it. So as far as the flavor goes, it's not that complex. And I would expect it to be, not only because of Dr. Bill, but also because of the $90 price tag. This should be an experience rather than just an easy sipper. And it's not, which is unfortunate. Now that we've talked all about this whiskey, we've nosed it, we've tasted it, we've learned all about it, this is the part of the video that I give kind of my overall recommendation. Now, I have a different kind of system. I don't do like a 1 through 10. I find that that's not very useful because everything's just a 1, a 7, or a 10, right? So I have a different rating. I do ignore it, which is this is terrible. I do try it, which is like, hey, you're at the bar and maybe you pay double for what you should, but you should try it anyway. It's something that you should experience. Then we have buy it, which is buy a bottle. Then we have stock it, which is, hey, buy a bottle, and as soon as that's out, buy another bottle, and then buy another bottle. Just keep it on your shelf. In this case, I want to just kind of say a couple things. So I find it very interesting. I don't personally know a whole lot about Beyonce. I'm a 41-year-old man. That's not really my wheelhouse, but I don't really know a whole lot about her other than that recently she's had a country album. And so knowing that she's from Texas, I found it very interesting that she didn't do this with like a Texas distillery, like Balcones or Iron Root or Andalusia. Any of those distilleries make fantastic products and are not unfamiliar with these grains. And they would have made a potentially better choice. But I understand she's probably going for volume. She's probably going to sell a billion of these things because Beyonce. And with Dr. Bill behind it, at least we know it's pretty good. So when I drink this though, I have a couple of problems. I already mentioned that the price is way too high. Now, let's just focus on that for just a sec. My perfect price point for this is like 60 bucks, maybe 65. And I don't think I would have any problem with that whatsoever or recommending it at that price. I think that's fair, especially knowing that the grains and the celebrity and all of that stuff. 40 for Long Branch is insane. I have no idea how they got it that low. But 60 to 65 for a celebrity endorsed whiskey is appropriate. 89 is insane. So that's my opinion. Okay, so now that we've kind of gotten that out of the way, the other kind of bigger problem is that for a luxury whiskey that is $89, this is not complex. The smell on this is fantastic. The taste is kind of a letdown. It's basically one tone, and that's it. It's super drinkable. It is good, but it's boring, and that's a problem for me. Speaking of, I guess, not boring, this bottle is beautiful, and I'm sure that they spent a lot of money on it, and honestly, this bottle looks great. I'm going to have this up on the shelf back here. It's going to look fantastic, but it needs to be better than just a bottle. But I will also say that they were smart to put that on, make it look really nice so it looks good on your shelf. People come over, oh my gosh, this is the new Beyonce whiskey. Like, that's a thing, and I get it, and I'm okay with it. Okay, so time for ratings. I've been kind of mentally going back and forth between buy it and try it, and it's definitely not an ignore it, it's definitely not a stock it. Is this something worth trying? In my opinion, I'm going to give this my rating of try it, because I simply don't think it's worth buying a bottle of. It's not there. It is a fantastic first attempt. Honestly, you guys did great, and I do know that SirDavis is planning on doing more expressions, so I will probably pick them up, as long as the price point is okay. But I simply can't recommend anybody buy this for this price, because it's a unique mash bill, but it's not an interesting flavor. So, unfortunately, that's going to be my verdict, I guess, on this one. But anyway, thank you very much for sitting here watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested, go check out the Patreon. All the links and everything's below. I do very much look forward to trying another SirDavis. I think that they can probably do a better job. Maybe spend more time in the PX barrels, give it a little bit more fruity taste. I think that'd be good. But anyway, I don't want to go too much into that. Thank you very much for joining me here on the Whiskey Dictionary. I hope you have a great rest of your night. Cheers.